Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, a psycho Karen pushed the disabled daughter of a retired drill sergeant into a river. She claimed that my kid devalues the neighborhood. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one starts like this. In my life, I've come across many different people from all walks of life. Whether it was from active war zones or boot camps on home soil, I was never far from conflict either. But I never expected to find such fierce and bitter hate from someone living in such a nice neighborhood here. After a few years in active duty, I swapped career paths, focusing my attention into the soldiers of tomorrow as a drill sergeant at my nearest boot camp. This was a lot of hard work, but nothing that I hadn't gone through before, recounting my own boot camp horror stories. And there I was for the better part of 30 years until I was forced into early retirement due to a health issue. While I could have been angry or upset, I accepted my retirement, giving me more time to spend with my family. It was at this point in my life that I decided to uproot and move houses out of the city and into a nicer place in a quiet neighborhood with my daughter Izzy. Izzy had been disabled since birth, but found in recent years her mobility decreased even further, which meant our old house was no longer fit for the purpose. This helped push the move too. I was glad to find that I had many kind neighbors who were happy to see me on moving day, many offering to help or giving advice on the area. One neighbor in particular, Karen, lived directly opposite from me and had been very appreciative that she no longer had to live opposite an old empty plot. Despite her strangeness, many in the community seemed to know and love her, Karen having lived here for most of her life. She even had a social media profile, not something you would have expected from someone verging dangerously on entering their early 50s. My daughter arrived later that afternoon to a welcoming committee of friends and neighbors. I decided to hold a small party in the front yard so that we could introduce ourselves properly. Most interactions were perfectly normal, all except one. Karen, who had seemed quite cheerful and helpful not 2 hours ago, was now aloof and distracted. After a brief hello, she excused herself and went home. While it may have been subtle, I noticed that this particular change in mood was prompted after noticing my daughter. I wanted to be wrong, but I trusted in my sharp intuition and good judge of character. The work started the next morning. While the house was a big improvement on my daughter's needs, there were still a few things to add. Firstly, with a sledgehammer and cement, I replaced the porch steps for a sloped entrance, and then, while taking a break outside, I noticed Karen was making her way over to me and she didn't look happy. Karen was annoyed that the supposedly loud work had woken her up and that it was very rude of me to do work so early. I reminded her that 11 AM was not very early, but she refused to accept it. As the argument continued, so too did her complaints and excuses. Although I never asked Karen's opinion on the renovations, she still had plenty to say about it, calling the change an ugliness that would devalue the neighborhood. I scoffed at her and only seemed to frustrate her more, knowing that she was not being taken seriously. Karen then had the balls to say that I should have not moved here if the crippled kid couldn't manage. Angry at the added insults towards my daughter, I confronted her behavior, though Karen seemed to feel no guilt or remorse about the fact that she said this. She in fact was quite clear about it and that Izzy didn't meet her high standards for living here. As you can imagine, we had little to agree on, and without any way for her to boss me around, Karen left and I continued working. I made sure that the last few changes I made were extra noisy too. The next day, I was sorting through the mailbox when another neighbor came over to give me a flyer. This flyer mentioned an annual riverside picnic being held on the upcoming Saturday afternoon. I was hesitant to go given the other neighborly disputes, but I also didn't want to let the conflict ruin my impression of the area. I had not told Izzy about Karen's complaints, though she felt equally unsure about her presence here, possibly catching on to the difficult glances or hushed words from Karen at the welcome party. After some careful encouragement, we both decided to at least give it a chance, even if we only stayed an hour. I forgot to notice at the time who it said was the main host and organizer of the event. Skip forward to Saturday, and the weather is perfect, which cast off any last-minute doubts about going. My daughter and I have not been able to do much relaxing or socializing since our move, so this proved to be a good time for us both to unwind. When we arrived, we were pleased to find a small group already there, and for a while I thought we were luckily Karen-free. Unfortunately, her loud and demanding whines cut over the noise of conversation, and that hope was dashed. In the same manner as our initial introductions, Karen seemed fine with my invitation, but her mood soured when she noticed my daughter, something neither of us failed to notice. Izzy was immediately unsettled and wanted to go home, the stress of the event already weighing on her. I left briefly to grab us some food before we returned home, but while in the queue I heard Izzy calling out. Looking back, I saw Izzy was going through some of the tics from her Tourette's syndrome, which consisted of short, involuntary yelps. I also noticed somewhat nearby, Karen was playing and talking to some followers on her smartphone, but was increasingly annoyed by Izzy's spasms. I quickly made my way over there, but before I could, Karen got up and approached Izzy instead, starting to shout at her. I moved quicker, darting through the crowd, but when I got back into line of sight, Karen stood alone on the hill as cries of panic erupted around them. I moved with the crowd to the riverside to find that Karen had pushed my daughter into the water. My own instincts kicked in, moving my body quicker than I could realize. The river was not fast, but Izzy had washed some distance away before I managed to catch up to her. Luckily, she had managed to free herself from the wheelchair in the initial fall, or its weight would have dragged her under. I had not even noticed how cold the water was until I saw my daughter turning pale, also exhibiting severe shock. Carefully, I pulled her back to land where others were at hand to help us out of the water. As I turned to look back, what I did see was Karen filming the whole incident from her smartphone and grinning. My daughter apparently ruined her video, so she made one of us instead. After making sure my daughter was alright, I stormed over to Karen, who put the phone between us as a flimsy defense. In amazement, Karen claimed that it was actually my daughter's fault that she fell, the wheelchair rolling off on its own. Karen had remarked and joked about it as if it didn't concern her, before turning an evil glare back to me and cursing me for saving that piece of trash. The cogs inside me turned and I faced straight into full drill sergeant mode, giving her a shouting match that even Karen couldn't keep up with. After a few minutes of stunned silence, Karen was nearly as pale as Izzy was, and feeling satisfied at the result, I returned to my daughter. Izzy now found it difficult to control her Tourette, something that until recently had been a quiet and minor part in our daily lives. It also did not help that I was trying to calm her. There was a growing crowd around us of worried neighbors and nosy passersby that peeked at the unfolding drama through their smartphones. In a flash of temper, I urged everyone back, coming off angrier than I had meant to. This seemed to at least work, with the crowd giving us some breathing room, but one person was edging closer instead. Karen's voice could be heard over the noise saying, "What? Is the show over already?" Turning to my daughter, "Would you stop being so dramatic, you brat? Shut up!" Izzy battled with her own demons while Karen battled for authority, repeatedly shouting the same orders at my helpless little girl. When Karen raised her hand towards my daughter, I snapped. Turning Karen in my direction, I knocked her across the chin in a swift jab, sending her rolling down the hill but resting shy of the water. Whether I wanted it or not, the cops came shortly after that, eager to get the full picture of the afternoon's events. I was allowed to accompany Izzy to the hospital before joining Karen at the precinct to tell my version of the story. From the start of the interrogation, I could tell that things were dire, and what they had pieced together so far was a strong, short-tempered man who had knocked down a beloved member of the community, aka Karen, in front of many witnesses. But I knew that if I let Karen win now, the damage she could do to us would be immeasurable. She would send me to jail and Izzy into foster care. I could not let that happen. Over the next 3 hours, I calmly and repeatedly cooperated to the best I could, and to my relief, things did start to look up for me when time had revealed the darker side of Karen. The following legal battle was fought with our very lives and futures on the line. Karen did everything in her power to label me as a violent and abusive man who struck her down when she was trying to help, boosted by her social media fame and local followers. On the other hand, I had witnesses from the picnic and Karen's own video to thank for our rescue. Finally, Karen was charged with attempted murder and all charges against me were dropped. I wonder what Karen will think when she realizes prison does not have good internet. And here, Ripe Stars, I am so glad that the Karen finally ended up in prison for what she did. Seriously, if that person would be still walking around freely outside, I would be deeply upset. Either way, the next one is titled By Law Revenge. So the call about the long grass was kind of a last straw thing. The backstory: my grandpa passed away 2 years ago and I moved into his house. He was pretty healthy, but he let the yard go down a bit, the grass was maintained but the trees were overgrown, his pond and patio were dirty, etc. Our neighbor, years ago, sold their yard to a property builder. Our properties are in an L shape, so our neighbor was using our backyard as her virtual backyard. For the past 2 years, I've been trying my best to maintain the backyard while also working and dealing with my grandpa's stuff. Well, for the past few weeks the backyard has fallen a bit as stress from work has creeped in and I was sick for a few weeks. Before this, the neighbor has always had nitpicks, but I mostly ignored them, and they rang my door one day to complain about mess in the back, and I told them, I have a life outside this house. If it bugs you that much, you're more than welcome to do the work yourself. Following that, bylaw came by and they were very understanding about my situation and gave me more than enough time to feel better and then mow the lawn. Well, that whole thing pissed me off and I wanted to get the typical white picket fence as there was not a fence and we were passively looking for a dog. So then I decided, screw it, and built the largest fence I could, and since her house was right on the property line, she now looks out the window and instead of seeing my backyard, she just sees a big wooden fence. And yeah, ripe stars, that's always the best way to deal with nosy, entitled, annoying neighbors. Just build a massive fence and you simply won't see them anymore. Either way, the next one is a coworker am I the a-hole story. I don't want to give away too much, but we work in a food service establishment. All the employees work with the food in the back and then hand it to the customers at the front counter. My coworker can't find a babysitter or daycare 9 times out of 10, so she takes her kids to work and keeps them in the back. They are really hyperactive kids, so she brings a portable crib and an iPad to keep them occupied. Well, the 4-year-old already knows how to climb in and out when he gets bored and keeps running around the establishment barefoot and bothering customers. Her 1-year-old always tries to do like his brother and constantly climbs out only to fall face down on the floor. My coworker uses her phone a lot, so she constantly goes outside for a 15 to 30 minute period to talk on the phone. This is when she tells me to watch her kids while she is out. Usually I have no problem doing so if the store is empty, since I'm usually in the back anyways, but when we are in rush hour and she does this, it's literally impossible for me to do so. So yesterday this happened. She went outside to talk to her boyfriend and left me with her kids, asking me to watch them. However, as soon as she left, a family of 5 came in, so I told the kids to stay calm and set them up with a YouTube video while I took their orders. As I am taking their order, I hear a loud thump. A second later I hear a scream from the smaller kid, and I apologize to the family and excuse myself. When I go check on the kids, the baby is again on the floor on his stomach staring at me crying. I check that he is okay, he is, and pick him up and finish taking the order with him on the side of my hip. Right then, my coworker walks in and asks what happened. I tell her, and she tells me how she asked me to watch them. Then a customer chimes in, saying that they thought the kid was mine. I said no, and then she tells my coworker that it's not my responsibility to watch her kids since that's not the job I'm getting paid for. My coworker gets her kid and goes to the back. After a while, the store emptied again, and my coworker started talking about how rude the lady was and how it is just a favor I'm doing for her. I said she is right though, and before I could even blink, I was getting called all sorts of names. Now she complained about me to our boss, and I'm being lectured about teamwork and empathy. I just simply don't understand when this one-time favor turned into part of my job description. So Reddit, am I the a-hole? And here, ripe stars, let me know what you think about this in the comments. Do you think that OP is the a-hole or not? Comment number 1, sweet Jesus. If this is a chain store, please call corporate and the regional manager. They need to know that there are children in a crib on site. Let them deal with that. There's no way I would take that lecture from my boss. Also, tell the coworker and your boss that you will no longer watch those kids. That's outside the scope of your job description, not the a-hole. Also, start looking for another job. Please apply today. Comment number 2, not the a-hole. There's so much wrong with how this is being handled. Your boss actually sided with your coworker? Are they related or something? I would look for a new job immediately. And yeah, ripe stars, I would 100% agree with the commenters here. It is absolutely outrageous how OP's coworker demanded that he takes care of her kids while she very clearly neglects them. That is obviously not within any scope of any job description unless you work in a kindergarten or something. Anyway, the next one is titled Neighbor Maliciously Complied. I, 59 male, live in a major city in Ontario, Canada. I live in a small subdivision and have 5 neighbors total on my street. For the past few years, during the winter when we are getting a lot of snow or a bad storm, I'm leaving for my overnight shift at around 8 to 9 PM, I will put my wife's windshield wipers up on her car and do a quick walk around to my other 5 neighbors and put their windshield wipers up on their cars. Obviously not if they are outside or something, but if it looks like they are in for the night. And well, many of them forget to do this, as many of them have children and it typically slips their mind and their wipers will be frozen to their cars in the morning. It is just something nice I like to do to look out for my neighbors. They are all always grateful of this and thank me for it. Many of them started doing it too, and there will be nights where I will forget to put mine and my wife's up, and in the morning one of the neighbors has done it for us. Anyway, recently one of our neighbors moved and a new family moved in as of last week. It's a young couple and their 2 young children. The other night I was leaving for overnight shift at around 9 PM. It was snowing really heavy and we were supposed to be getting almost 30 centimeters of snow and it was freezing outside. So I put my wife's wipers up and do my usual quick walk around to the other neighbors. I was hesitant when I reached my new neighbor's house as I've only introduced myself once but did it anyway. And then, as I was putting the second wiper up on their pickup truck, the husband came charging out of his front door yelling, "Hey, what the F are you doing to my truck?" I tried to explain to him that I was just putting his wipers up to help him. He continued to scream at me to "Get the hell off my property and don't touch my crap again." The wife then came out and started yelling at me too. I apologized and started walking away. Some of my neighbors heard the commotion and came outside to see what was happening. They tried explaining to him too that it is just something that we do. Both of them were not having it though. Fast forward to this morning, I'm arriving home from my overnight shift and as I'm walking in I see the wife of this couple struggling outside to break the ice off the windshield wipers of the truck. I guess she was trying to take her kids to school and the wipers were frozen solid on the car. She sees me and yells over, "Hey there! Do you mind giving me a hand, please?" I look over to her and yell back, "No, sorry, thought I was never to touch your crap again, ma'am," and walked back inside. She yelled back at me, "Wow, douchebag!" Told my wife about this. She thinks I should have helped her because she was trying to get her kids to school. I disagree, as I was just following what they told me. The next one is titled, My Neighbor Karen. So, I have a fun story where I have officially wrangled the Karen to work for me and not against me. Regardless of the hysterics behind the whole Karen movement, these aggressively offended people can have some real effect on our day-to-day lives. Entertaining effects all the way, but sometimes some very real negative ones too. I live in an older neighborhood where most of the homeowners have been here for 15 plus years. It's a great place, super small and comfy, quiet and safe, everyone is polite and waves. All around ideal. I have 2 smaller boys who have a dog they bring with them occasionally from their dads. Shortly after I moved in, I started getting complaints from my landlord. Asking me if I was throwing parties or if I had animals or if I was arguing. Let me clarify, I live with my boys, we are quiet home buddies unless I am traveling for work, and all these questions and complaints from my landlord were coming in on weeks I was not even in town half the time. Come to find out, my neighbor who is behind me and whose name is actually Karen, ironically enough. I was texting my landlord all throughout the week complaining about how noisy all my parties were. The thing is, I have not even had a housewarming get-together here, so in true petty passive-aggressive behavior, I started announcing every time my children and I were in our backyard, saying things like, "Be quiet kids, I know we are in our backyard, but the behind-the-way neighbor is not above complaining on children apparently." Suddenly, the complaints stopped. Shocking, a month or 2 went by without complaints. Then one day, as my kids and I were checking out a garage sale on our street, a woman walked up to me and struck up a conversation, asking me questions like, "How do you like your neighbors?" I of course said they were great and all was well, and then she asked, "What about your behind-the-way neighbor?" And that is when I realized I was talking to the Karen herself. So I explained that I had no issue with her, but the once-a-week complaints on things I don't do were getting old. She started getting upset until I said, "I'll tell you what, let me give you my number, and if there are loud noises you don't like, I can then let you know it is not me." That's all it took. She has since respectfully texted me a couple of times where I was able to clarify that it was not coming from my yard, whether it was or not, and it has been 4 months with 0 complaints, and now I have the aggressive species known as Karen at my disposal. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I gotta say, that is a very special and very impressive display of taming a Karen that we have not seen previously, if I remember correctly. No, but seriously though, sometimes it can definitely be worth it to get on the good side of awful neighbors instead of just fighting them. The next one is titled Perfect A-hole Tags. I will be as vague as possible to stay anonymous-ish, but suffice it to say that I work in a technical field in the life sciences. Months ago, I got a call from an unhappy customer who wanted to return a product because of appearance. Now, they were well outside the return window, but I referred them my tech people to A, hopefully fix the problem, and B, potentially replace and refund their product. Well, it turns out there's nothing wrong with the product and there are procedures in the instructions for what to do. The customer was not happy they could not just return or refund, so they kept calling the tech people one after the other, looking for the result they wanted. Eventually, they rudely berated 3 of my 4 techs to the point that the techs reported it to me. I informed the customer in no uncertain terms that the product was fine, usable and not returnable. I offered to credit them the amount, which was honestly not deserved. They refused. It turns out that they were having trouble paying their corporate credit card and wanted to get refunded to that card. We don't do this, ever. Keep in mind that this would mean they would keep the product and yet somehow get their money back. Fast forward a few months and I no longer cover this territory. New guy tells me about them and I let him know that they've been very rude to our people and have a history of acting shady to avoid payment. During our digging, the customer let slip that their customers in Central America will not be pleased. Record scratch. Hold up, we don't allow our customers to resell without permission, and we definitely don't allow them to ship internationally. These are biological, so we must know that who we were selling to won't be using them in a bad way. Them reselling to foreign agents potentially, okay almost certainly, violates customs rules, skirts international distributions agreements we have, and we avoid these things like the plague. It happens occasionally, particularly in certain port cities, but we discontinue sales to anyone we find is doing this and report them to customs officials. So now they have insulted our employees, tried to get out of paying, and they have let it slip that they are violating our rules plus custom laws. They no longer can do business with us and they are being reported to custom officials for likely breaking customs law. It is likely that none of this would have happened if they had not been a pain in the butt about payments and had not insulted my colleagues. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.